Welcome Algebra 1 students. We are going to be finishing up our activities on writing equations today by looking at writing equations of parallel and perpendicular lines. So make sure before you watch this video that you've watched the previous video about finding the slopes of parallel and perpendicular lines, because you've got to understand that before you can work on what we're doing today. And so what we are doing today is we are continuing to write equations, but they're not going to be equations of lines, they're going to be equations of parallel and perpendicular lines. So some of the things that you need to remember that we've talked about before is this idea of point-slope form. I don't know why there's two equal signs there. Remember, point-slope form looks like this. Y minus y1 is equal to m times x minus x1, which looks a little confusing. But remember, all you're going to do is you're going to fill in three spots. You're going to fill in whatever the slope is in front of the parentheses, whatever the opposite of this x is next to the x, and whatever the opposite of this y is in our point next to the y. That's point-slope form. Once we have it in point-slope form, then it's really fairly easy to rearrange it and to put it in slope-intercept form, which is the form we are usually wanting it to be in. That's the form that we are able to graph it from, y equals mx plus b. And so those are the two things we've been working with as far as writing equations. And in the last video, we introduced this idea of how to find the slope of parallel and perpendicular lines. Remember, parallel lines, it's just going to be the same exact slope. So the slope does not change for parallel lines. But for perpendicular lines, we're going to need the opposite reciprocal slope. That sounds confusing, but it really just means two things. The first thing is opposite. That means we're going to change the sign. And the second thing is reciprocal, which means we're going to flip it over. So basically, if we started with a number like 1/2, we would flip it over and make it -2. Or if we started with the number -4/3, we would flip it over and make it positive and make it 3/4. And so we're going to be working with both of those things today, parallel lines and perpendicular lines. So again, parallel lines, they don't change. Perpendicular, you change the sign, you flip it over. So you might want to write that down so that you've got that to look at as you're working through the lesson today. So here we are going to work on just what we talked about in the last lesson, just lines that are parallel and lines that are perpendicular. So here we have the equation y equals 1/2 x minus 7. So if we want to come up with the slope of a line that's parallel to that line, what would the slope be for a line that's parallel to the line y equals 1/2 x minus 7? Well, the first thing you want to do is know what the slope is of this line y equals 1/2 x minus 7. So what is the slope of the line y equals 1/2 x minus 7? Okay, it's 1/2. It's that number in front of x. And so a line that's parallel to it will have a slope of what? Okay, don't make it too difficult because you don't change anything. Since it's parallel, we just say that the line that's parallel to it also has a slope of, whoa, where are we at here? Also has a slope of 1/2. Okay, what about if it was perpendicular though? What if we wanted a perpendicular line? What would we do for the slope of a perpendicular line? Okay, so for a perpendicular line, you have to do two things. You have to change the sign. So first of all, this is a positive 1/2, so you're going to make it negative. And the second thing is you flip it over. So instead of being 1/2, you would write it as 2/1. Sorry for the sloppy writing there. Instead of writing it as -2/1, though, we could just write it as the number -2. So either one of those answers would work, -2/1 or -2. All right, so what we want to do with that today, okay, this is what we did in the last lesson. What we want to do today is we want to extend that just a little bit. And once we know what the slope is, we want to be able to go ahead and write the equation. So let's practice doing that here. We're going to try to write the equation of a line that's parallel to y equals 2/7 x minus 6 that goes to the point 21, -4. So first of all, this is kind of divided up to help you kind of work through this problem in 3 steps. Don't forget, it does say written example down here whenever you're working on this. So if you get stuck, just click on that written example. It'll show you an example to hopefully help you figure out what you need to do. Okay, so first of all, what would the slope of this line that's parallel to y equals 2/7 x minus 6 be? Okay, since it says parallel, that means we don't do anything. We're going to keep that same slope. So since this one is 2/7, our parallel slope is going to be 2/7. Okay, now we just need to write the equation in point-slope form. So remember, to write that equation in point-slope form, you're going to fill in 3 values. So you're going to start by writing y, and then what number will you write next to the y? Okay, we go to our point, we look for the y value, which is -4, and we write down the opposite. So we write down +4. Okay, then we put the equal sign, and then what number do we put in front of the parentheses? Well, that's where our slope goes, and since we want parallel, we're going to use this same slope. So we're going to write down a 2/7. Okay, so that's the part that we have to remember from the last lesson. and then we put our parenthesis and we put an x, and then what number is going to go next to the x. Okay, so again, we go to the ordered pair, we see the 21, and so we're going to write down minus 21. Okay, now we just want to rearrange that and put that in slope-intercept form. So remember, to get from point-slope form to slope-intercept form, we have to, first of all, distribute. And so as we distribute, I'm going to write the work down here. It's going to be y plus 4. 2/7 times x would be just 2/7 x. And then 2/7 times minus 21. You may want to kind of go to the fraction calculator that's online. I think I've put a link to that. When you're doing your MyOpenMath, if you go up here where it says resources, if you click on that, I think it will take you to a fraction calculator. But you're going to take 2/7 times -2, and so when you take 2/7 times -2, what you end up getting is -6. Okay, that's not quite slope-intercept form yet because we need to move this plus 4, and so when we move the plus 4, we subtract it over here. We have to change the sign, and so we get y equals 2/7 x minus 10. And so that would be our answer in slope-intercept form. All right, so you can see most of this process is the same as what we've been doing before. Once we get to this equation where we know what the slope is, we know what the point is, we can put it in point-slope form, we can rearrange it to get it into slope-intercept form. Now, let's just look at what that would be if it said perpendicular instead. So let's work through a problem for perpendicular. So here's our problem that says perpendicular to this line. So we need to first of all figure out what slope we're going to use. So if it says perpendicular to the line y equals -3x minus 6, what will you use for the slope? So perpendicular means we have to do two things. We have to change the sign. So right now it's -3. So we're going to change the sign. We're going to make it positive. And then we're also going to flip it over. Now, when you think about flipping over 3, remember you can write that as 3/1. And so when we flip it over, it would be 1/3. Okay, now we're ready to write the equation in point-slope form. So go ahead and write down the equation, what it would be in point-slope form. All right, so what you should have done is you should have written y plus 3, because remember, you look at the y ordered pair, and since it's -3, you write down the opposite, equals 1/3, because that's our slope. And I'm having trouble getting this to work here, 1/3. And then in parentheses, x plus 6. Because again, we go to the ordered pair, we look at the x, we write down the opposite. Okay, rearrange that, and what would you get in slope-intercept form? Okay, so as you rearrange this, it's going to become y plus 3 as you distribute equals 1/3 x plus 2. And then we move that plus 3 over, so we make it a -3. And so then our final answer ends up being y equals 1/3 x minus 1. So that's our equation in slope-intercept form. If we were to graph that equation, and we were to graph the equation y equals -3x minus 6, they would be perpendicular. They would meet at a 90-degree angle. But we would also find out that it also goes to the point -6, -3, which is what we're going for here. All right, so that is what you're going to be working on today. And so hopefully you won't have any problems with that. If you do, though, make sure you send me an email, contact me through Canvas Messenger, and I'll try to help you out. But as far as our video goes, that's all, folks.